Mark II Sovereignty on the floor. Late afternoon sun streams through the leaded glass windows of the Reformation alcove, casting long geometric grids across the expansive oak table. A dense, hushed academic stillness blankets the library space, broken only by the low, public background hum of students whispering 2 aisles over. Julian leans over his open Koine Greek text, his finger tracing the text of Mark chapter 2 as he breaks the quiet. Look at the syntax in verse 5. When Jesus tells the paralytic teknon, aphientai suhai hamartiai, he isn't acting as a passive prophetic mouthpiece announcing that God has pardoned the man, because the verb form and the immediate context show he is executing a systematic deconstruction of Second Temple religious legalism right in front of the scribes. Lucas shifts his weight, his eyes narrowing as he looks at the parallel column. The scribes actually nail the core theological premise when they internally ask, Tis dinatai aphienai hamartias eme hes hotheos, who can forgive sins but God alone? Because in the Hebrew scriptures, personal sins are an exclusive offense against Yahweh, meaning Jesus doesn't correct their premise. He accepts it to establish his implicit Christology by using a uniquely divine attribute, like searching their hidden thoughts, to validate a uniquely divine prerogative like forgiving personal debts. Chloe drops her pen onto her open notebook with a hollow thud, staring at the cluttered landscape of highlighters. Can we please strip away the heavy academic jargon for 2 seconds and face the raw weight of what's happening on the floor of that house? Jesus looks straight through the social hierarchy, ignores the physical paralysis for a moment, and handles the deepest hidden human debt before anyone even asks, forcing everyone in that packed room to realize he is claiming the identity of the God of Israel. Ethan taps the wooden table with his knuckle, drawing a quick structural diagram in the margin of his syllabus. The sheer logistics of the scene back up that disruption. You have to look at the concrete mechanics of the first-century dugout roof where 4 men are literally ripping apart a mixture of dried mud, thatch, and beams to lower a mat, entirely bypassing the customs infrastructure of Herod Antipas on the Via Maris that kept outcasts marginalized, which means the physical breach of the house mirrors the structural breach of the religious system. Hannah flips back a page, her finger tracking the narrative movement. The narrative layout shifts beautifully right here from that paralyzed man to the custom booth, because the transition from the name Levi to Matthew marks a catastrophic, countercultural break from Roman client economic allegiances, moving the story from a posture of communal mourning and fasting straight into the radical inclusion of an eschatological wedding feast where table fellowship functions as an immediate, proactive offer of covenant inclusion that completely bypasses the religious establishment. Julian turns the page, his pen hovering over verse 17. The medical analogy he drops on the Pharisees is loaded with a heavy, razor-sharp irony, because by stating that the healthy don't need a physician, he isn't validating their self-righteous legalism. He's structurally disqualifying them from the kingdom because they refuse to recognize their own terminal status. Chloe sighs, propping her chin in her hands as she looks at the Greek lexicon. It's a terrifying mirror for anyone who thinks they have their spiritual life completely managed. He's basically saying that if you think you're perfectly healthy, the doctor is just going to walk right past your table to sit down with the outcasts who actually know they are dying. Ethan traces the transition down to the wineskin parable. The physics of the fermentation process explain the structural break perfectly. Fresh, active wine expands violently as it ferments, meaning if you pour it into rigid, brittle, dried-out leather skins, the container bursts and the wine is completely lost, which is why Jesus isn't discarding the core substance of Judaism, but rather shattering the contemporary, rigid institutional vessels, because the dynamic, invasive presence of the kingdom requires a completely new framework. Hannah nods, her eyes bright as she connects the parables to the final conflict in the grain field. The old containers simply cannot hold this type of life, which becomes explicit when the disciples start plucking heads of grain on the Sabbath and the Pharisees launch an immediate legalistic hyper-surveillance campaign over minor technicalities. Lucas taps his text, his voice dropping an octave as he tightens the theological loop. Jesus blows right past their minor legal loopholes by citing the historical precedent of David eating the consecrated bread of the presence, using an a fortiori logical argument that intersects perfectly with the Johannine principle, where Jesus claims his Father is working until now, and he is working too, which means he isn't just defending a casual walk through a field. He is claiming the exclusive, sovereign, divine right to maintain, define, and give ultimate rest as the absolute Lord of the Sabbath.